There's a little girl out there named Lillian, and she loves to watch soap being made on YouTube, so here's something to make this project a little more interesting. In this episode of Thermal Mermaid, we're making Almond Moon in soaping and story time. Many years ago, the sun and water were great friends, and they both lived on the earth together. The sun often used to visit the water, but the water never returned the visits. And at last the sun asked the water why he never visited. The water replied that the sun's house was just not big enough, and that if he came with all his people, he would drive the sun out of his home. And then the water said, "If you want me to visit you, you'll have to build a bigger house. But I warn you that it will have to be a very large house, as my relatives and friends, we take up a lot of room." And the sun promised to build a huge house. And soon afterward, he returned home to his wife, the moon, who greeted him with a broad smile. The sun told the moon what he had promised the water, and the next day they began to build a large house to entertain the water and all his family and friends. When it was finished, the sun asked the water to come and visit him. When the water arrived, he called out to the sun and asked him whether it would be safe for all his family and friends to enter, and the sun answered, "Yes, you may all come in." And the water began to flow in, followed by the fish and all the other water animals. Very soon the water was knee-deep in the house. So the water asked the sun if it was still safe, and the sun again said, "Yes, please come into my house." So the water and all his family continued to come in. When the water was at the level of a man's head, the water said to the sun, "Do you still want more of my people to come in?" Well, not knowing any better, the sun and the moon both said, "Yes, yes, the more the merrier." So more and more of the water's people came in until the sun and the moon had to sit on top of the roof. When the water flowed over the top of the roof, the sun and the moon were forced to go up into the sky. And there they've been ever since. And the sun and the moon stayed in the sky for many years. And a very long time ago, when the moon and the sun and the stars were not so far away as they are now, a woman lived all alone. She had no family and she was terribly poor. And to make her home, she collected the leaves of a palm tree. And she built herself a tiny hut, and she lived there quietly for many years, picking berries and plants for her food. She could afford nothing more, but all was well for a very long time. She enjoyed the world for all it offered, and above all else, she loved the light of the moon. In those days, the moon was full of rich meat, and she was always fat. People sang to her, they loved her light, and they sang praises all the time, and they could not imagine their lives without her. But in those days too, sometimes the moon came to the earth during the daytime to visit, and she loved her visits. She loved observing the way the people lived their lives, and she felt great love for all the people, and she especially loved the woman who lived in the hut made of palm leaves. One year, a drought came to the land. The rivers grew dry and the plants withered. The berries shriveled, and soon the woman in her palm hut began to starve. The moon saw this and felt very sorry for this poor woman. She saw how hungry she was, and she watched as she grew so skinny, so she could barely move outside her hut. The woman was so weak, she could no longer do anything but lie in the mud and wait to die. And the moon thought her heart would break. She decided she would sacrifice some of her own meat to feed the woman, and so she came for a visit. The moon peeked into the door of the hut, and the poor woman looked up at her, smiling at the sight of ones she so loved. "Welcome to my humble home," the woman said. "Please come in." The moon stepped inside and looked down at the woman and said, "Please, cut away some of my meat for your food. I have plenty, and you can see that I'm big and round and full and fat. Nothing will happen to me if you take some away." At first the poor woman resisted, but the moon was so forceful. "You must eat, you must live," she insisted. So very carefully, the woman sliced off a tiny piece of the moon's flesh, and the moment she tasted it, she felt stronger. Oh, thank you, I could never offer you enough thanks," the woman said. But the next day the moon came again, and once again she insisted that the woman eat some of her meat. After that day, the moon came every day to visit the woman in the palm hut. "Take some more," she always said, "take enough to fill you up." Each day the poor woman sliced off a little more meat, and each day the moon grew smaller and smaller. When she returned to the sky, she was not quite so bright and fat, and to the others looking up at her, she began to look thin. Then she seemed skinny, and she gave off less and less light. The people began to grumble about this. "Why is our moon growing so thin?" they whispered among themselves. "What has happened to her? Why has she changed? Let us try to fix this trouble." And so people began to follow the moon when she came to the earth. They followed her to the palm hut. When the people looked inside and saw the woman with her carving knife carving meat out of the moon, they understood, and they ran back to tell all the others. And the very next day the moon came to visit again, but when she reached the woman's hut, she saw a crowd standing outside the door. As the poor woman walked outside with her knife, prepared to cut her daily slice of meat, the people began to shout at her. "Leave our moon alone," they cried. "Put away your knife." "You must not harm our moon," they urged. "She belongs to all of us." The poor woman of the palm hut was terrified, and the moon was too. She'd never seen the people so angry. She'd never heard their voices so shrill and laced with fury. The moon raced away, back up to the sky, and the woman hurried back inside her hut. And after that day, the moon never returned to earth. No one knows what happened to the poor woman in her palm hut, for no one else came to rescue her. But ever since that day, the moon has chosen to remain in the sky. And during the day she hides. They say she fears the people's anger. Once during each month, she appears to be as fat as ever, round and bright, radiating light, and reminding us all of her glorious days and of her generosity. But as the days pass, the moon grows thinner and thinner. Some people say she's remembering the woman in the palm hut. They say she grieves for her, and others say she still gives away part of herself for the sake of others, that there must be other women carving away the meat that once was the moon's flesh. But everyone celebrates the day each month when the moon returns again, as full and fat and bright as she ever was. Can you see the face of the generous moon in our Almond Moon sew? The story of the generous moon is an old fable that comes from Nigeria. If you enjoyed this special episode of Thermal Mermaid Soap and Storytime, be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to this channel. And if you have an idea for a soap you would like to see being made while I tell you one of your favorite stories, then tell me in the comments below and I'll add it to the collection for Soap and Storytime. Sweet dreams, Lillian and Jacob and Jalea. I'll see you next time.